Sunday was booked by the time we did it on that day. And by the time she did it at 1 or 1:30, city managers, they're booked again. So I emailed down there and going, look, how many city managers are there that's coming? Why do y'all not have enough space? This is 2 years in a row. We've been here 3 hours before. I mean, what's going on in this meeting that makes everybody sell out? And it ran out last year on the hotels. Same thing. I don't remember. I think the first 3 hours. You know, that's just crazy. Oh, all mine were too. Tuesday. That was it for me. And so mine were all gone too. And so what we will do going forward for next year is we will have to be there at 10 a.m. when it opens. Because how in 3 hours? So what happened was, you stop it right now.
Don't be describing. So that's fine.
Hey, Jerry.
You'll hear me?
Yeah, it's coming through very nicely. Hello, gentlemen.
All right.
So we got about 6 people, 7 people.
Come to the table.
Y'all come sit around the table, please. All right, so we'll call you back in a few, but this is gonna work fine the way this is, okay?
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
That sounded pretty good to me.
Georgia, coming back to Clemson, Tennessee, I was really nervous. Yeah.
Megan, do you have a piece of paper for a sign-in sheet? You will? Yeah. You will? Thank you, man. Hey there, hey, warm us away. Oh, yeah.
Joe's out there. a little longer since I've seen you last time.
Most people tell me your hair is this.
Junior,
So
6 o'clock when
long,
you're ready.
that's common.
What's their top right now? Is there still one they have a phone issue?
Hey Thomas, I've got you
They read those
on the
dogs.
speakerphone,
Was Diane
and
Dunn's dog.
I would tell you that
She lives up the road.
we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 votes on it.
Across from that
Okay,
big
and
farm.
so the majority are sitting around the table like we had last week, and the others are sitting on some side chairs. And fire, and all of
You're a good man.
here. Okay, so this is going on Facebook, so we'll be recording of this obviously.
Okay.
So we can hear you clearly, you're coming through the microphones. Y'all, unfortunately, the city attorney who's in charge of this meeting got hung up in court, and then he's hung up on 285. So he will not make it with us, but he is the one who will lead the meeting.
That's right. Well, I'll open the meeting. Y'all stand with me for the prayer and the pledge. Good to go. Pray with me. Lord, thank you for allowing us to gather here this evening. We ask that you watch over us, watch over our discussions tonight, and remind us that we are a community, we are a small town community, and that we're here for the greater good and to glorify your name. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. And the pledge. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we're here to start discussions of some of our land use around the city. I think that over the past couple of years, we know that there's some issues, there's some things that we need to address and talk about. So Thomas, our city attorney that is on the telephone, is running a little bit late, but he can tell you a little bit more about what he's been working on. Thomas, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, can you go ahead? You feel comfortable doing that?
Yes. What I would like to know first, and what I plan to do, was obviously I know who the city folks are and what their roles are, but I would like for the folks, especially since we've only got about a dozen folks from the public, I would like for them to introduce themselves, tell what their interest is, whether they own or represent properties in the city of Demorest or right around Demorest, and kind of what their thoughts are about land use planning, so that we have some idea of what at least these interested citizens believe about this.
Thank you, Thomas. And you know, one thing, this is we have nothing else now. This is a listening session, and we'll hear from the people. And we appreciate everybody being here. As far as city council members, we have Andrew. Andrew, you're gonna wave your arm around so everybody recognizes you. We have Sean Allen, we have Jimmy, and we have Donnie Bennett. We also have the fire department here. We have our new fire chief and our new assistant chief.
Chief Schurer, and then Assistant Chief Louette, also known as Lance if you can't get out, Louette.
And if anybody gets way out of line, Casey's back there in the corner, ready to jump on.
As our new police chief.
And Mark, of course, is our city manager.
And then we have Megan Chastain, our city clerk, and Rhonda Andrews, who handles all our accounts payable and all our electronics back there. I'm going to give you the microphone so that it's, because this is being, going through Facebook, and so it is being recorded. So we would like to have record, even though I've got y'all to sign in with that. So Mr.
So we are limiting the discussion just to keep everybody talking. We can come back around to everybody, but let's put a 5-minute per person limit on there. So if you go over, please pass it on.
Hey folks, my name is Dave Sleppy. I'm here with my son Joe Sleppy, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what we own and why we're here.
Where do you live at? Where do you live?
I live off of New Liberty Road. Joe lives down in Atlanta.
Yeah, so we're here just trying to understand exactly what the community and what the new guidelines, kind of where they both meet as far as what we can do on the land. I think the plot is at 228 Arlington. It's right off Demorest, Mount Airy, and it's a piece that Dave and I bought, my dad and I bought back in I think early 22 or 21, and just trying to work with the city and work with you guys to figure out exactly what we can do and what you guys would be most open to seeing there. So I think initially we wanted to look at doing some apartments. That was not well received. And so here we are today to try to figure out what might be a better option than that. That's about all I have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Rick Austin, 1590 Double Spring Road, and fortunate enough to have grown up on a family piece of property that borders my mom's, which is 338 Tennessee Street, so it's contiguous, and so we have 20 acres or so that is contiguous family land. Traditionally, has been utilized for. I grew up on a small farm. I've said it 1,000 times in a lot of political different speeches, but we had cows, we had chickens, had a horse or two from time to time. Got bucked off for the first time, got bitten by a horse for the first time. So obviously we're interested in how the community develops. We realize that, I realize that every piece of property in the city is not the same. A tenth of an acre in downtown city limits is different than, say, some of your larger tracts that are on the fringes of the city limits. And so I wanted to participate in that conversation and see what the thoughts were regarding how council and city manager felt, and as well as my neighbors.
So you are looking for something in our zoning that has an agriculture class to it as well?
Yeah, and I've got a few things written down. You want me to outline those
go ahead.
right quick? You and I had the opportunity to speak earlier today, and I know that there's no sense in reinventing the wheel. We're looking at the city of Cornelia and perhaps some of the things that they've done. I'm exorbitantly familiar with Demorest zoning. We have 4 districts. We have LI, MI, HI, which is low intensity, moderate intensity, high intensity, and we also have sensitive land, which is generally not been imposed much, but worthy of looking at as well, particularly as we go. You and I talked about rooftops and asphalt create more water. We live in hills and valleys. We live in a very wet area of the county in terms of where our water table is. No one needs to know that better than to go into Demorest Park and see what kind of problems we've had with trying to battle water there. Sensitive land is one of those performance districts that is defined by our land use as prone to having hazards, threats to life and property created by flooding, landslides, et cetera, and so forth. And flooding is one of those big ones, particularly in areas that are close to creeks, and there are a few of those. One of the things that we don't have in our land use right now is an ag district. Now, agriculture is an outright permitted use in many of the areas, in the LI and the MI. Not so sure. I'd have to go back and look, and I've got it up on the screen on the HI. I would encourage us to think about an ag district. City of Cornelia does have an agricultural district. They have a minimum acreage on that. I don't know that acreage fits us, but theirs is 5. But they do permit agriculture, and there's a lot of agricultural history to the city of Demorest. And so I would encourage us to think as a community about, what those uses look like. Look, I smiled when I got out of the truck tonight because I heard a rooster crow twice. Just across the way right there. That makes me smile. We're a small rural community. So I'd hate for us to see us go away from some of those things that make us unique. And yes, I do have, I've spent the winter months clearing a 3 acre pasture that had grown up a little bit too much, and intend to use that in much the same way that it was used when my parents took hold of that property back in 1970 or 1971. So, and again, I'm here to listen to what the other community members, what my neighbors have to say about this. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yes.
Well, Hey everybody, my name is Blaine Newton. I'm a small investor slash developer. Got property over on Oak Avenue, so I guess mainly I'm just interested to see what's being proposed in terms of land use changes and how that could affect me and some of my goals, quite honestly, so.
My name's Frank Dean, and I own property on 709 Main Street. It joins Mr. Slippy's property. I was violently opposed to the apartments being put there. To me, the area we live is kind of a historical community, and, you know, I don't really have any ideas of what needs to go in, but I don't think it's apartments, and, I don't think it's, you know, depending on what kind of commercial business it was, I'd probably be opposed to that too. There's several historical houses in there. One across the street from me, the one that is down around the curve there. Ed's house was actually a historical house at one time.
At one time.
Yeah, so, but I would like to see it come up with some good ideas on the zoning, so everybody, I don't guess everybody can be satisfied, but at least the ones that go on those kind of properties.
I'm Ed Hendricks. I'm Frank's neighbor. I have 10 acres of downtown Demorest. It's mostly floodplain where the Hazel Creek and Kent Creek come together. So it's a little forest of my own in downtown Denver. So I can hear the cars going by, but I can't see them. Anyway, I used to be a doc here for about 30 plus years, and I've lived here for almost 40. So I guess that makes me a newcomer. I never could figure out how you could get to be an old timer in this town. But anyway, I'm just here to find out what's going on.
I'm Amanda Mason. I live at 344 Long Street, and like them, I'm just here to see what we proceed with.
Thank you.
I'm Robert Hibbert. I live on Cedar Avenue at the dead end. Used to be the Bosma place. Creek runs along the lower part of my property. I'm getting a lot of erosion because they regraded the development off of Hancock Road, and where it takes the corner there, I've lost quite a bit of soil. Otherwise, I do what I consider forestry of selective cutting of trees that are not going to amount to anything, usually for firewood. I go camping. I have 3 parcels of property in Demorest. One that adjoins Rick's mother's place. And the main one, it's about 10 acres. And then I bought a lot from that development that regraded it so that when it rains, I got way more water down there than we ever did before. And it seems there's nothing can be done because once it's done, as far as the state is concerned, we have to live with it. They can't do anything about that. So the one lot I bought, I said, told the assessor that there would never be a house on it until Musk sells all of his lots on Mars. It's not big enough for a house, and it ends in a right of way for the sewer. But it allowed me to get to the other side of the creek. So I put in a driveway, and that's what it amounts to. And so we go down there camping, we have friends camping, RVs stop by, things like that, just for a day or so. Who's next?
I'll come get it from you.
Thanks, sir. This is you.
I didn't know we were all speaking.
Well, you were to sit at the table with us.
I want to be sat over here, we didn't have to talk.
You're in the public, we got it.
So Jennifer Alston, Rick's wife, I live at 1590 Devil Springs Road, and of course, we have the same views. We want to just make sure that our land is protected. You know, we have experienced a lot more flooding with the subdivisions that have been behind us, too. I think a few times, come close to taking out the road. It's gone up over the road, so that is a concern, just making sure that we're being wise with the things that are put in place to protect what we have and the integrity of our home.
I will tell you that a home builder has bought a bunch of lots, and they're about to start 5 to 8 houses on that Habersham Meadows. That's what you're talking about, right?
Is that the property?
Hancock Meadows. Yeah. So they've got 3 permits or 5 permits and coming back for more. They've got maybe 20, 30 of those lots.
And is that inside the city limits?
It is.
And so are we adhering to any kind of ordinances now to prevent additional flooding?
Yeah, we did adopt the Georgia stormwater, so they have to go by the Georgia stormwater. And some of the new, any new developments have to abide by that as well. I don't know what that looks like. I know that they have to follow code. We do have a very good inspector.
Well, let me say that for this. Our third-party inspector for the home inspections does not do the silt and soil erosion. We have to turn that over to EPD.
Correct.
As the fire chief has noted through his code enforcement. So if you see this issue, you will contact myself or the fire chief, because he also is the code enforcement officer, and he will look at it and turn it over to EPD. And then DNR could, or Wendell Sullins as our stormwater guy from the county, because we're working on another piece like that, just so you're aware. So if you see it, feel free to call me.
Is that mainly like silt?
Silt fencing, anything that would fall under that, because we do not have an inspector for that. We have to utilize the state. So if you see that, EPD is where we're going to go. And same thing, you can call it, report it to, and report it to us too.
The problem with that is EPD is notoriously overworked, understaffed, and extremely slow.
That's what we have. That's what we have to work with.
So you call one in now and it might be 12 months before they show up on site.
And we do have, our fire chief is acting as our code inspector, it will go out and put a stop to some of that too.
So we have that now, because we truly now have a code enforcement officer. So.
I was told by the environmental protection person that I told about the erosion on my property, that said it has to be, I believe, 3 acres that is being developed, and it has to be in progress or they can't do anything, and once the permit expires, you live with it.
Okay, I mean, I hear you, sir, but y'all see something?
Matt?
Yes.
He is absolutely correct. I learned that in discussing today, that EPD will not touch it if it's not in progress right now. So if you've got a permit, you close out your permit. If you've done construction, EPD won't touch it.
But they also told you on this case we're working that it could be civil. You may have to file a civil against the people. That's what they're waiting to tell the issues that we're working on today. Whether
They consider that a civil issue, a lot of that's going to be a civil issue. I can't touch on some of these issues that I'm hearing about water are going to be tough. They're civil issues.
And as I already said, maybe, it might be something we have to look at and add into our stuff.
while we're making these improvements right here with our land.
So that's the purpose of this meeting, is to learn these issues so we can make the changes.
So in addition to just like the silt during construction, we're talking about like after trees have been cleared, driveways poured and all that, you've got, a lot of water running off into
And the time to fix
those
that.
areas and flooding, which then ends up, going downstream into some other big
Right.
water basins.
And the kind of forgiveness is why the construction is going on. But Yeah, because once it's there, it's there. And again, we can't go on private property at all, so.
So,
I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
guess, so you've got things in place right now that you're looking at or putting some guidelines
That's
in
what we'll be
place
doing
for
on
these
this.
that are being developed, so that,
We would look at that during this time, because it's pretty bleak, a lot of this or very vague, and that's why we're trying to get this updated now to do this, and I'm encouraged by how many people showed up today.
Yeah. So if there's a thought on your mind about some of this, speak. So,
Brian Popham has been, was one of the greatest, he's not gonna like me calling him a cheerleader, but I'm gonna call him a cheerleader. He during the last 8 years, I've seen him stand up and implore council a number of times. We have to do something about the amount of work that's coming through Hazel Creek, Camp Creek, Cross Creek. Because if we aren't proactive about those things now, we'll never get it back. And one of those events that occurred, one of those major rain events, and you and I talked about this afternoon, water was flowing over Double Springs Road almost 4 feet deep. It removed speed bumps from the road. Brian thought that it would be smart to drive into that, to come up my driveway to check on us. He almost lost the truck. I mean, it absolutely frightened him. And was able to back out and get out of that. That's how much water was coming through there. When I was a child, Double Springs Road washed completely out. A larger culvert was put in at that point in time, but Brian says that culvert is nowhere near the capacity of what's coming down Cross Creek. Right, no, this is the one right there at my mailbox where the creek runs underneath Double Springs Road. And so when you get enough water to come through there that the culvert can't hold it and it goes 4 feet over Double Springs Road, it's gonna cost us far more to fix that road after the fact than it will be before the fact, and it's still not gonna be cheap. And every rooftop, every driveway, everything that's done, and that's why I pointed out the sensitive land, those areas that are prone to flooding is already outlined in our ordinances as they are now, and gives us the opportunity as council and members of the community to have that conversation about how much, what it actually is the amount of appropriate development on that makes sure that we preserve life, liberty, et cetera, for those that are downstream, because ultimately, I believe that government should stay out of our business to the point, as long as I'm not negatively impacting my neighbor. The moment that I negatively impact my neighbor, that's when government kicks in. That's when government says, okay, wait a minute, you can't do this because what you're going to do is gonna cause X, Y, and Z downstream. And so,
Literally downstream.
literally downstream.
And, here's the thing that I don't know if everybody knows, but I live in a subdivision that is very close to Rick and Jeff's house. I pass across that pond and that creek every single day of my life and go and work. And then back, when I'm done with work, and it amazes me the difference in the levels of water from just a regular rain to some of the rains we've had lately. I mean, it's pretty crazy how much water comes through there. Now, if you were to go on today, it may look like a little bitty creek, But if you go on another day, it may look like a chocolate milk stream that's just absolutely rushing down through there. So I understand, and our subdivision's up on top of a hill, and so we don't get that. I mean, I have to drive down to it and up to see all of that, but I definitely see the difference in that one stream and the one directly behind my house.
That's right.
That feeds that pond.
Yes, sir.
You can definitely see a difference on that. I mean, easily. Like you can see it from my house one day and not from my house another day. So I understand where you're coming from on that. I see you there,
I noticed when we get a heavy rain that the creek swells on my property. And that's because a lot of off the street sewers and things are directed toward us all. But the really noticeable thing is that it's the color of Georgia clay. So it's eroding farther upstream from somewhere. You can't must lose a lot of soil somewhere.
Is that,
So I was thinking if you were going to try to do something, maybe you should go look upstream a little farther.
I am Betty Allen. I live on Double Springs Road. We're all neighbors. And I'm basically here tonight just to observe. I have 3 pieces of property. One on Holly Street, Porter Street, and then Double Springs. My husband was raised there where I live. Unfortunately, he's gone now. But it's not, if Lord's willing, we'll never leave the family. So I'm just here to kind of see what is taking place in our little town. I am opposed to apartments, so that's basically why I hold on to everything that I've got. That's why I'm here tonight. Thank you.
Guys, if I may, could you give this, if you don't mind, just could you give a definition of what you mean when you say apartments? I mean, I know it probably sounds pretty, well, you got 100 units of place for people to live, but what somebody calls an apartment may not be what somebody else may call an apartment.
Ask Slippy over there, he's got a pretty good definition.
All right, give me a definition.
I'm not sure what you mean, Frank. We're not pursuing apartments. Frank, you killed the apartment a long time ago, Frank. We got invited here, so we're just here.
Well, that's here, and that is something that we'll have to talk about as part of a number of things, but, we'll circle back around.
Okay, that's fine. 'Cause I mean, some people call a duplex an apartment, and I don't. So, I mean, I just want to make sure we're all clear on what we're talking about.
What we had proposed that has got Frank upset is the 48, it was 48 units.
Gotcha.
Broken out into, I think, 4 buildings or so, such thing.
But we'll have these definitions as we work through this.
Okay, all right. We'll have more of these meetings as we start growing.
Can I say this, Mark?
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned duplexes. I don't see a lot of difference in the duplex and apartment buildings.
Well, no, that's fine, but I'm
I
just.
live next to one, and if you could hear the cursing and going on that I have to listen to sometimes.
I hear you.
You understand why? No, I don't want duplexes either.
Oh, no, I understand. I just want to make sure we're clear on what we're all talking about, that's all.
I didn't think duplexes were allowed in Demorest, except that, I think Malcolm built one.
Well, okay, I mean, you can call it a duplex or whatever. I'm just trying to distinguish between small multifamily and large,
But we'll get there
Okay.
through these meetings.
I'm Jane Horton, and I live in Demorest, but not in the city. And I just was kind of curious to come and see what was going on, because I am a transplant of this community. I have been associated with the Sequoia watershed, and you'll know what all of that translated to. And so I'm just keeping up with what's going on.
Thank you.
I'm Carmen Nichols. I own 2 historic houses here at Demorest. One's in 1904 and one's in 1908. One of them is a multifamily unit that I rent out on Airbnb and through Verbo and things like that. Mostly for people who are working at the hospital for anywhere from a week to several months, or it's also parents that are coming into town for their sons or daughters' volleyball or baseball games at Piedmont. It's right in town, across from Sweetbreads and by the Federated Church. And then I also own the rooster that's crowing right here next door. I have a mobile chicken coop, and so they tool around to a different spot in the yard, but they do stay confined in their little mobile coop all the time. As we have foxes here in town as well as coyotes and a couple of other critters. I'm also an avid trout fisherman, and my family, although I am not, quote, native to Habersham County, my family has been in North Georgia up around Tate City and Persimmon since 1780. And as an avid trout fisherman, I've got to tell you that while I fished here as a child, I now drive 6 hours and fish in Kentucky so that I can return back to the type of trout fishing I had when I was a child. So, the poultry industry in North Georgia and land use and development all attributed to the loss of our trout waters. And while we do have some areas that are left to us, the majority are gone. So, yeah. So, there are a couple of places in North Georgia where there are native brook trout, but you can count that on one hand. So, one of those areas, my great-grandmother carried brook trout in to hide them when the DNR stopped rivers with rainbows. And she carried them in a half barrel on her back and put those there. So, you know, there's a happy medium. I'm interested in the medium of conservation of the historic homes and the outlook in that area. But I'm also a person that has a practical side as far as multifamily and things like that are concerned. I don't think at this point in time that we can anticipate that our children are going to be able to afford or buy the houses or property that we did during our lifetime. You've seen the house values and everything go up over the past couple of years, and that's only a small taste of what's to come. I also, at one point in time, lived overseas, lived in Scotland. 45-year mortgage north there. So with that in mind, you have to also keep in mind multifamily and what multifamily looks like. You know, it doesn't always have to look like a large, massive apartment. My 1904 house, of course, it was always a residence downstairs, a residence upstairs. And at one time, it's been a printing press downstairs, a grocery store, and now I've turned it into an apartment. I rented out long-term for a long time, and now I do short-term. So everything evolves, everything changes. You have to find the nice medium and keep as much history as you can. It's important to people coming to the area. It's important to us, and it's important to our children.
Thank you.
You don't have to speak, Mayor.
I would also like to hear from the council. Y'all all live here too. I'd like to hear what y'all have to say as well.
Sean Allen, 183 Walnut Avenue. As Dr. Austin said earlier, every tract of land in the city is different. And the purpose of the meeting is to evaluate where we're going to be in the future, what those tracts of land should be designated for. As Mr. Hibbert said, sometimes there was exceptions or things that happened where a duplex got put in, which is right next to me. So, I can definitely understand that sentiment with that.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Davis. I live on Connecticut Street. I'm a short timer. I've only been here 3 years. when I was out running for city council, talking with folks, 99% of the folks I talked to told me they want to keep Demorest. They don't want to see a lot of development. They want to keep the small town feel. And that's kind of what I like. That's one thing that drew us to this area.
My name's Donnie Bennett, and I have lived here literally almost all of my life. Went to school in this building, okay? I've lived in Demorest forever, and I've seen Rick riding his bicycle when we were kids downtown, me wishing that my parents would let me ride a bicycle downtown.
I didn't know.
But, I mean, Demorest, what we're doing tonight is we're starting the process of defining Demorest and what we want it to look like in the next 5, 10, 15 years. This isn't about my piece of property, your piece of property. It's about our children's property. And if you do not control growth, it controls you. And I've heard that, and I've read up on this, so much. And that is the phrase that keeps coming back. If you don't control growth, growth controls you. And so that's kind of the way that I'm kind of looking at this. I'm looking at it as not a today. It's a 5, it's a 10. And do we want Demorest? Do we want Donnie Bennett's grandkids, Rick's grandkids, great grandkids to be able to go to Demorest Park and run around and have a good time? Yes, we do. Do we want them to look at our town and say, this is a cohesive, beautiful place? It's not this there, this there. It's cohesive. It's beautiful. It's Georgia in the North Mountains. That's what we want. That's why we're here. And so as long as we define that correctly, and we do all the things that we're supposed to do, put the work in. We've got to put the work in. We've got to make those definitions. We've got to be able to articulate what it means when we say an apartment building. What does it mean when we say I've got 2 acres of land? What can I do with that? If we can't articulate that, then growth is controlling us. And that's pretty much it.
That's very well said.
Yes, Don.
Well, like I said earlier on, I think that this is a listening session. We need to understand, we need to modify, make changes now before we outgrow and can't stop it. Now we can make changes and modify our zones, our land use by what the community wants, not what we want, but what the community wants. And that's what's important to us. We appreciate everybody coming out tonight. Andrew, you want to speak?
I'm good.
Okay.
Thomas, with that, we will turn it back over to you.
All right, so I think that some of the folks I could hear real well, others I had trouble hearing. I'll have to go back and listen to the Facebook post. But it sounds like I think that one of the advantages to doing what we're proposing to do is that we will be able to define what uses we want and what uses we don't. I think it was Dr. Austin made the point about there's a lot of the performance district that's sensitive land in Demorest. There are some real development challenges to those. There may be things that can be done, but I think that it makes sense to put a zoning classification on those properties that will require more site planning than perhaps those that are in the commercial or what look more like the high intensity performance district now. That will, we just went through something like this in one of the other cities that we represent, where it's one of unlike Demorest, which is a rural, this is in the suburban area, and this is the last really undeveloped piece, and it's on a commercial corridor, but there's some real challenges to it. And so what the city required the developer to do is do a whole lot more planning up front to show how they were going to handle stormwater, how they were not going to impact the downstream. There was the immediately downstream owner had a pond, a fish pond on his property, and in some jurisdictions, for Forsyth County, for instance, requires that if you're going to develop, that you have to do a baseline sediment study on any downstream property, any downstream water that is going to be impacted by your development. So that what that does, it does a couple things. First of all, it creates a real incentive on the developer to make sure that they do what they are supposed to do under the Georgia erosion and sediment control ordinances, so that they do not impact those properties. Because it was implicit in some of the things that folks said, is that once those if you let this get out of control, once those properties are damaged, it's really hard to get that back. It's really hard to repair that, and it becomes very expensive to repair it. And so there were things that we were able to implement in that jurisdiction in terms of bonding and those types of things that protected those sensitive properties. The other thing that I would propose is that in those areas that basically the baseline zoning classification would be some sort of agricultural, because it's like, for instance, like again, I could hear Dr. Austin most clearly. His property is primarily used for agricultural purposes, or he's not developing it, and he doesn't look to develop it anytime soon. And so that does a couple of things. It protects the value of the properties around. You don't put a more intense zoning on those properties than what the people want to use it for. So it helps them with their property tax situation. And again, if in a property like that, if the kids decide they want to develop it, or it winds up being sold to a developer, then that developer has to come in and provide a plan as to what they're going to do on it, and we have a real sense of what's going on. The other thing is that an ordinance like this will allow us to do is, I heard one of the other folks talk about wanting to protect their property, and there were questions about about the more intense uses like multifamily. Well, this will allow it. The way that the current ordinance is drafted is that the use chart is pretty ambiguous and it's hard to. I mean, there's a lot of things that require a supplemental land use permit, so council has a lot of control, but that creates problems for people like Mr. Slappy, who may have an interest in a piece of property or be interested in buying a piece of property, but they don't really know what they can do with it. And so one of the things that this will allow us to do is to define what can be done on these other properties, or if you want to get it rezoned to something else, what you can do if you get it rezoned. It will also allow us to impose, in the nature of trying to protect the adjacent property owners, especially established single-family residential properties and these residential agricultural properties, is buffer zones. One of the things, or buffers. For instance, if you've got properties that are both, let's call it R100 or R1, then there's probably, other than the lot line setbacks and building line setbacks, there may not be any kind of buffer. However, if you've got a commercial or a multifamily or something like that adjacent to an established single-family residential neighborhood, then there may be more intense buffers. Like there may be a 25 or 30 or 50 foot undisturbed buffer, so that those single family residents are not impacted are not as impacted by the development. So there's things that can be done to I think meet a lot of the interests that we're expressing, as well as do the things that Mr. Bennett most clearly expressed of being able to control growth. I mean, there's that, as folks to the south of you learned, and I represent a landowner that owns property in one of the counties south of Henry County. And I mean, up in this part of the state, we always hear, we don't want to be DeKalb, we don't want to be Gwinnett. Down there, that we don't want to be Spalding, we don't want to be Henry. But the fact of the matter is that you've got property owners that are going to sell their property. There's going to be some sort of development on them, or the city will get sued, or if, depending on what they ask for, they may be able to do certain things of right on their property now. And that was one of the reasons that we imposed the moratorium, was to prevent that kind of thing until we could get some sort of land use regulation in place. So it really is about what Mr. Bennett expressed, being able to not necessarily, there's always a slight bad taste in people's mouths when you talk about zoning, because you're telling people what they can and can't do with their property. Well, that's the whole reason we're having this particular meeting, so we can get some sense of what that is. I think at the end of the day, that most folks that are in Demorest or own property in Demorest it's not going to really impact what they can do with their property. It's just going to tell everybody what can be done on it, how they can do it, and provide a real measure of control as to how that gets done. Does that make sense?
It does, and let's talk about the process if it come up that it's the land use rules that it can't be done on the subject property. What would be the steps in this proposal for it to be done? What would a citizen have to do, or a landowner have to do to go through that process then?
Basically, let's say that someone had a piece of that there's a piece of residential or a piece of ag property. It's 20 acres. Someone comes in and wants to do a single family detached development on that. What would they have to do? Well, they would apply to rezone that. If we use and I'm using kind of Cornelia zoning classifications as kind of the go by, because that's what had been considered. If you rezone it from ag to R1, then there's a process. You have to file an application. You have to do, and I would propose that there be maybe some more requirements than what's contained in Cornelia's. There's a site, you have to present a site plan. You have to show how many lots. You got to show where the streets are, where the stormwater structures are, what all the other infrastructure that will be used on that will serve that facility. You may require them to provide what are called renderings and elevations, so that they say they're going to tell you something about the way the houses are going to look. You may require them to create, especially if all the property around that is still agricultural, create a buffer around those boundaries, so that maybe they get to put the same number of houses, but they're closer to the center, so that they're a little more compact. And so there's more open space, more green space. It maintains that rural feel that seems to be so important to folks. And at the same time, people get to do what they want to do with their property. And then if the next piece of ag property also develops and they have the same requirements, then you've got you've got these nice neighborhoods that are basically in the midst of a more green space and that kind of separation. You may be able to have, you may require, when you have situations like that, it's something to think about in the master planning. Do you want some sort of trails to connect those? Some communities like that idea. And because of walkability, with some of the things that the downtown area is doing and the restaurants that are coming, maybe you want the opportunity for people to do that. Demorest is a little more spread out than some communities, so I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to be viable, but it's something to think about. You can require them to have amenities. Now, people, you got to be careful how you do that. Everybody thinks that an amenity is swimming pools and a tennis court. Well, you've got to have a certain number of homeowners to be able to support those kind of amenities. So amenities may not always be swimming pool and tennis courts. It may be tennis courts. It may be a walking path. It may be a playground for the kids or something similar to that. So, but what the process would be, that there would be certain requirements of what they have to show in order to convince the council that they ought to rezone that property from an agricultural classification to allow them to do some sort of more intense residential use.
Hey, Thomas, this is Joe Sleppy.
Is there a plan in place that y'all have started working on to create a framework for what the, I mean, I guess the first question is, and maybe I'm behind on this, is the zoning that is currently the low intensity, medium intensity, high intensity, is that being scrapped and you're sort of starting from scratch now?
That is this discussion that we're pushing forward with, scrapping the old one and moving forward.
Okay.
And part of that, Joe, is there, when I look at the possible charts to look at what could go under one of those, it is so vague.
Yeah.
It leads into too much interpretation.
Yeah.
Is it my interpretation as the city manager? Is it the city attorney? Is it you who owns the property? And we're trying to make it very explicit. Here are the options. If you want something different, then you have to go to this zoning or something else like that.
Okay. Or you gotta come to council, like for instance, I had a city years ago where the building inspector, who was also our code enforcement officer, who was also our license official, had allowed a tattoo parlor to open up in town. Well, our zoning ordinance had one of those use charts, but tattoo parlors weren't listed. But by all accounts, that tattoo parlor, the owner was a good corporate citizen. It was clean. The clientele was, I mean, it wasn't a problem user. So they asked, but it was a non-conforming use. He needed to get a loan, and that was a problem for the lender. So he came to the city and asked the city to amend their use chart to add tattoo parlors as a permitted use in the commercial area. And council did it. And so it allows that kind of, it also creates some certainty for the folks that are there about what should and should not come into the community. I mean, in some of the types of users that have bad reputations, by saying these, I'm not saying that all of these are necessarily bad, but there tends to be a desire to limit pawn shops. There tends to be a desire to limit spas. There tends to be a desire to limit certain other types of uses like that, or to more closely regulate them than others. So, and all that can be managed by the type of regime that we're talking about putting in place.
Understood. And so, I guess is tonight sort of square one for? Okay.
This is beginning
of
this process.
And I guess just a little background on why my dad and I bought that specific piece of property in the first place is because it was zoned high intensity, which, the chart is vague, but it did say that you could have commercial uses, and there were, and also when we bought it, the fellow who sold it to us, the agent who was listing it was like, oh, apartments would be a great use here, the community would be very open to it, and so it was, I don't want to be here having y'all think that we came in and bought something or trying to push our way into the community and do something that no one wants here. And I think, not to get too far off track, but I think that y'all made that clear in our initial meeting a while ago, and Dave and I want to definitely walk things back and figure out a way to, have financial gain that we hope to initially, but also do something that you guys aren't gonna hate us forever for doing. So I mean, I do want to say that too. So if that's some sort of single family density, that's maybe a couple single family lots there versus a commercial use, we're open to doing that. So for whatever that's worth right now. But the reason that we bought the property is because it was zoned high intensity. And so I guess one of my main questions today is, is the framework that was existing gonna be completely scrapped and it's sort of just, I mean, what is the plan for
It
moving?
could be, it could very well be.
Yeah, and we're not saying that tonight.
No, understood, but-
It's up for discussion.
Yeah, and I guess that's a little, you know,
And that's where I said, when we started this process, I said, and I said this in one of our council meetings, there are gonna be people who could lose some of that flexibility in that time. And there could be people's property who pick up additional flexibility to that property. And that's when it gets personal to them, and that's when it hits home, just like you said right there. And so,
One example, I guess, that might help people understand is talking about some of the vague provisions is we have high intensity on one side, 2 acres. On the other side is medium intensity, but there was a rule in there that if you're within X number of feet, if your high intensity is within X number of feet of medium intensity, you're medium intensity. So that gets confusing for people. And, you know, when we get these offers in to sell the property, we like to be able to tell people at least, you know, me being a lawyer, they're like, whoa, Mr. Lawyer, what's up with this, you know? And so, you know, I can't really tell them what's up.
and that's why we're in a moratorium.
Right.
So it keeps
That's a good
that from
idea.
happening right now.
I like that. This also feels
Hey,
like.
folks, I'm here. I just pulled in the parking lot. I'm gonna hang up and I'll come in.
Okay. I thought I was gonna get this one.
yeah. Mark, this also feels like a massive undertaking.
Well, it's huge.
To rewrite the ordinance.
And we understand that undertaking, but we also understand that there's so many problems with what we
Right.
have now.
Yeah.
That needs to be addressed. And I think we all realize that.
Yeah.
I guess, can I just follow up with something? I think there's a real concern, obviously, about excessive growth and, you know, kind of making the changes that nobody really wants to see here.
Right.
But then you have to balance that out, it seems to me, with, okay, somebody has land that they bought, like in your case, bought for a specific purpose. And this may apply to me, I guess, indirectly as well, but, you know, we have a right to use the property for which we acquired the property. So there has to be some kind of way to make sure people's property rights are protected from, you know, where they once planned what they were going to do versus.
I don't think anybody's trying to take away what's already done.
Well, maybe not something that's done, but something that they might were planning, or something they were planning to do. Maybe it's just vacantly, or maybe it's.
This is Thomas the voice.
This is the city attorney.
Isn't there a term called grandfathered in? I mean, I don't know how they can change the zoning from what it was when you bought it. I mean, because.
Yeah.
You have a grandfathered use, but, you know, if there's nothing on it, or you have something that's a tear down and you want to redevelop,
Well,
now
yeah,
all of a sudden.
those things, yeah, if there's an old house and you tear it down and now you want to build a new one, you're gonna have to go through all the forms and everything that you have to go through to build a new one. But if you, have some kind of use, you're using it for something, and you can't just change the zoning and tell the people they can't do that anymore.
That's true, you can't, but grandfather, the principle of grandfather only applies to two-tenant uses. You don't vest in the general zoning classification. A jurisdiction can change the zoning classification. They can't make you tear down a use. If the city were to rezone the corner down there the corner down there where the restaurants are, we couldn't make them zone it to residential. We couldn't make them tear down the restaurants. They could continue to use those restaurants or use that property as restaurants until they sold the property, or there would be times when they could no longer do that. But you can't, by changing the zoning, you don't force people to quit using the property for what it's being used for. That answers the questions.
Now, just to be clear, if it's vacant, just to be clear for everybody,
Vacant land.
vacant land, just like there, it can change
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
zone.
Well, and-
So just so that you're clear, sir, that
And just for historical purposes, it needs to be, I think, for the benefit of the council, in defense of what's been done, both in the past and may have been done in more recent times. You look at the use matrix, and if you look at high intensity, there's only 2 outright permitted uses in high intensity. And those 2 outright permitted uses, that means council doesn't have a say in that. You absolutely get to use it if it's done that way or zoned that way, is commercial primary retail or single-family subdivisions. Multifamily is a special use that has to come before council. It was that way when you purchased it.
Understood.
And so when I hear people, I'm just making the clarification for everybody that's in here. I understand you bought it for a particular use, but if you look at the land use, you knew you were gonna have to come before and have a hearing and have council vote on that. And
Sure, which is what we did, and we accepted that. Sure.
I understand. Yeah, and you look at compatible surrounding land use with it, so.
There's also a big difference, in my opinion, between going from a subdivision to maybe one house or something, you know, which we're not saying that doesn't happen, but it's just, there's a difference.
Right.
Okay. No, so are you guys gonna employ a consulting firm or someone, like, I mean, it's people that have set up these types of?
Thomas has the contract for this, for the city.
Okay.
And he deals with many cities across Northeast Georgia and Metro Atlanta. And he is in charge of providing all the meetings. We will have, one thing we'll talk about this evening is the next set of meetings, because this needs to happen. Because then we're gonna get into June and everybody will say, well, I'm on vacation, I can't come.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing starting tonight. A lot of the
And
labor.
we're not starting to rewrite the first word and the last word. We're looking for other comparable cities and modifying it. So,
I've looked at the city ordinances to some small degree, and it seemed to me, I just got the sense that Demorest is, well, I think they got their ordinances from someplace else and just adopted them. That's the way it looks to me when I read them. You know, it's such a big job to come up with all these ordinances, and they say, well, what does Clarksville have? You know, what does Alto have? And we look it up to their books and say, okay, that looks good, we'll do that. And I think that's how these ordinances.
How would you
they
suggest
came
they
to
do it? If you don't look at similar sized cities, how would you suggest we do it?
Well, you know, these cities have similar problems, and a lot of the things I noticed, for instance, when I built my house, I think you don't have a building inspector. The guys that they got from Toccoa was called Larry Shed, and so you got a guy named Shed as a building inspector. And he came and he drove his truck around my driveway and he went out. And good. You know, that's what I like about Demorest.
So can I ask what the timing is gonna be on all this, as far as from the point now versus time in the future, at which point we'll have an updated code of ordinances? What are you thinking on that?
It could be 4 to 6, 8 months. Our present moratorium will expire in the month of April, and it will be on their agenda on April 9th for the mayor and council to choose to extend it, so that we're sitting this at another 4 to 6, 8 months time frame in there.
Got you, okay. Just to follow up, if you don't mind, just, when you say moratorium, what are we putting a moratorium on exactly?
I'll let Thomas explain that.
The current moratorium basically prohibits any kind of permitting, zoning, anything other than platted single-family residential subdivisions. So, I mean, it is intentionally a broad moratorium to allow the city to put in place ordinances and regulations.
Okay, gotcha.
So if it's an existing lot that's an acre and a half or less, we went to an acre and a half because the Sweetgrass has those larger lots out there that are platted existing lots. Go back over here off Hazel and Blue Ridge back here, there's residential construction going on there because they're existing platted lots.
Okay.
So on lots that in approved subdivisions, let's go back to Hancock Meadows just for a second, Thomas, just so I'm clear. No building permit has been pulled yet for some of those, or they're in the process of beginning that, and we're in the middle of a moratorium. We talked about sensitive land. It's on the border of a creek. So is it just gonna be a carte blanche on if there's been a subdivision that's been approved by the city at some point in time in the past to allow that to continue? Or is it gonna be looked at on a case by case, particularly with sensitive lands?
The moratorium only, if if it's a platted subdivision, they can build it.
They've got permits, Rick,
So.
because they are existing and it's less than that acre and a half.
And really, that's put in place not to stop some of the already approved subdivision lots from residential construction. And also, you can't come in with your plat and say, hey, I want to break this up into 15 tracts. Well, you stamp my new plat, the moratorium stops that.
Those lots at, off of Hancock Road, I don't believe there's a single one that's even a half acre. I think the lot that I bought, I think it's 0.3.
Because it's on sewer, you're gonna see that kind of density with sewer.
And unfortunately, with the lot size or any, that's something that we can't take away or fix. It's done. We can control some of the stormwater. We can help with that. But as far as seeing that developed out,
Well, there's no stopping this runoff on that whole slope now. It was just lawn where it used to be trees and everything. And then it somehow dumps in the middle there. I don't know what happens down in there. There's gotta be a outlet for it somewhere.
You see back then, the requirements for detention ponds weren't required by the city.
Yeah.
And that doesn't cure all, but that is at least a holding capacity
Well,
for that.
that slows it down.
Correct. It
You
can
know,
be
so that would be nice. That would have
But
solved
you
the
can't go
problem.
back and make it retro. It would be something we would put in some of our development standards now going forward.
Yeah.
Because
Of course, they're ugly as hell, though.
they are, and then there's requirements of who's gonna own them and who's gonna maintain them going
and what
forward.
they look like. You know, great point. We can define around what they look like too.
So, I've got a question. So, I know those are behind an existing subdivision, but, I mean, it was not part of an original plan that was submitted. So you've got different owners, it's a different phase and all of that. So why does that make it something that's just automatically approved under an original when it wasn't part
Are you
of?
talking about Hancock
Yes.
Meadows? Well, you had an original developer that would have turned in a plat. The plat would have been approved and stamped and filed at the courthouse.
Phase 1, phase 2, no.
Right, I don't know anything about phase 2. But anyway, but on phase 1, all that's done and it's there.
Correct, but you're talking about new.
But
that's all.
yeah, if you, now,
Phase
okay,
two,
I'm saying what you're
different
saying, now you're
developers.
saying if they come to us to ask to approve for phase 2, if we put all these things in there, these would be requirements. So is there people that think it's approved or something, the way you say that, Rick?
Yeah,
I thought that's what you said.
phase 1 is, I mean.
No, I'm just talking about phase 1.
Yeah,
We don't have anything about phase 2.
They're looking at.
Phase 2, my knowledge, has never been approved.
Okay.
It's never been a plat that's been approved through the appropriate channels.
So if somebody's coming in here new, or a whole piece of property after we've done this and the moratorium's gone, we would set the development standards. The size of lots, the streets width, and,
Take into account the slope and the runoff.
well, that's the engineers will come up with that. And that's where EPD would have to sign off on these plans, and there'll be other watersheds that would sign off and review these. Because again, I can't tell you about the slopes and what that's gonna do to you down to, you know, that's not my forte. But there's people who do review those like that, and they have to be approved.
And like on that piece, we can put development standards in place where they submit those plans to us. We submitted those plans to the EPD for that land disturbance permit. And then we would get those changes back, their engineering made those changes, so we could regulate that discharge between the river creek.
The one, that development I mentioned on the phone, a lot of the design work that they did for the zoning is design work that typically wouldn't be done until that particular jurisdiction required a land development permit, which is the next step in the process. They made them do most of that in the stormwater planning at the zoning phase, so that it would be on the site plan. And so the developer wasn't happy about it because it cost them about $40,000. Typically it wouldn't cost until you got to the LDP stage, but it protected the downstream landowners.
And LDP means land disturbance permit.
And this is beyond the scope of what we as a city can control, but can I encourage mayor and council to work as closely as we can with Habersham County? Because just beyond our city limits, I understand there's about 300 houses that are permitted. At least the concept of 300 houses just beyond Hancock Meadows that is going to be put in on the Hancock Road. I'm hopeful that the county has put it, that has similar types of development, to protect stormwater and to, the county has different regulations than us. I'm hopeful that we can reach out as a community, as an elected government, and say, hey, this is what we're having to deal with in this particular area, and if you allow and don't put the appropriate things in place, we as a city are going to have to incur the cost to have to deal with this, and that in turn means that we have to deal with the cost of dealing with what they're doing in the county. So it's imperative that we join hand in hand with the county, make sure they understand.
To play off of that, because that developer did come see us to be annexed into the city, and he did ask for roughly 200 lots with our sewer. And after several discussions with them, they made a decision to go to the county, and it's supposed to be 150 lots, but they will be requesting our water and sewer to help their density with that. And that is the only standard we will give that team, is just our water and sewer standards. Everything else, we will have no control over. Everything else will be done by the county. And when they have public meetings, it's imperative for y'all to go to those meetings to speak up for or against things, because that's where those county commissioners hear your voice, just like we hear you right now. And that's when you have to have those words in there to be able to oppose this or be for it. And that's the place where you're heard the loudest, is in that meeting when 200 people show up against something.
Thomas, I do hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and it raises an interesting question that I want to ask Thomas. Can a city withhold adding water and or sewer out beyond the city limits if the development doesn't meet or is detrimental or perceived to be detrimental to the city in the future?
There's a couple of ways to handle that. Most cities, well, a lot number of cities, if you're gonna be not necessarily a water customer, but if you're a sewer customer, you've got to annex in, so they've got some control over the development of that property.
I thought something like that happened a few years ago. Didn't we have to connect to a development to make it be part of the city? Does anybody remember that?
There was a strong attempt to do so.
I think if you look at the map of Demorest now, it originally was a square, and now there's these other little doodads out there, and I think that had to do with them getting water from you.
And that might be part of, a creative way to add to our tax base. If you're gonna attach to our sewer, then you're gonna have to annex into the city, which does give us the ability to have greater control on those properties that border us, that may cause us some monetary problems down the road as we deal with it as a government and as a community. So just something to think about. I don't know whether that's right or wrong, or a good idea or a bad idea, but I think it's worthy of at least exploring.
City of Gainesville will make you annex in if you are trying to get sewer and you are accessible with that. They will require that, or they have you sign a document. If you do come accessible, you automatically would annex in. And the difference is we charge an outside water and sewer rate to them. And if I took 150 houses, and how long would it, on garbage day, would it take me to get that garbage truck out of that subdivision?
Yeah, but you're making money on garbage. That's the only one you're making money on.
I understand, but then again, my police and fire, the streets from the maintenance that we would have to accept.
Mutual aid, automatic aid, they're gonna roll anyway.
We're rolling over there, but that's a whole another story on that we're working through too, to balance out those numbers.
Just an idea.
If I found something interesting about this Hancock development, at the end of this, where it abuts my property, their surveys show their lots going onto my property. And so essentially, when I paid big bucks for that driveway, I was buying some of my own land. At least according to their surveys. If you put them together, all of a sudden there's these jagged lines coming in across my boundaries.
So the general thought, the initial approach is that, in due respect to what you said about utilizing other jurisdictions, is that there is no point in reinventing the wheel. And so looking at the mayor suggested that we use case studies as kind of our format to begin the process to work through. It is they've got some zoning classifications that we don't need. They've got all of their overlays probably don't apply to us, like they've got an airport hazard overlay, and they've got their downtown overlays, but they don't really apply to us. We would have a downtown overlay, we have historical districts, so that's gonna apply. But for the most part, if you all, those that are here are interested and wanna take a look, that's probably going to be our starting point. And you can find that on, if you Google Cornelia Muni Code, you will find their zoning ordinance and you can look at it. There's a couple zoning classifications that we probably will adopt. The other thing to think about is that if you, our zoning map, which now shows LIMIHISL, we're gonna have to redraw the zoning map. I think the regional commission will help us with that, so that we don't incur that entire cost ourselves. But all of those areas will be rezoned under the classification. And, I mean, there's gonna be some natural, like a lot of the SL, as I mentioned on the phone, we're probably gonna do some sort of ag classification. A lot of the low intensity will be zoned to, there is some commercial in that area, but most of it I think is residential. One thing that Cornelia doesn't have that we will need is an institutional classification, because Piedmont takes up an enormous amount of our property, as well as the other schools and this governmental facility and others. So that'll be another change. They've got some use provisions that we probably don't need, but before the next meeting, for those of you who come, if we take a look at that ordinance, that'll probably be a starting point for the start of the discussion.
So we appreciate everybody coming on tonight and having this first round of discussions. And then we'll advertise and get ready for the next ones. Would anybody else like to add anything else?
Most of you, I think, know how to find me, but if you want to email me with suggestions or thoughts, my email address is thomas.mitchell, my name, at Carmitch, CARMITCH.com. And both Mark and Megan have my cell phone number and that email address, so if you want to get in touch with me, they both of them have my permission to give my cell phone. I'll be discussing this.
And at the next meeting, we will have some handouts. We will have the existing map here that hangs in my office. And y'all want to come by and look at that for any reason, feel free to come up to City Hall. Whether I'm there or not, the ladies will show you where the map is in City Hall. Anything y'all want to talk about with me, y'all can email us and we will get things. That's the fire truck they got to call.
The copy I have doesn't show the parcels. The parcel, doing other parcels. Can we get the regional commission to send us a couple big versions of that map and show the parcels, so we can start trying to determine what zoning classifications are going to be on various parcels?
Yes, we can do that for sure. To y'all, Mayor and Council, I will be sending out to y'all tomorrow an email asking for the next meeting date. So I need everybody to be thinking, like I said, we got April, we got May, and then we're in the summertime and we're gonna have problems, but we gotta keep moving through that. And so I'd like for us with Thomas to get some dates and even look to your long-term to set some other future meetings so people can kind of plan around this. So do look for that, and Thomas, we'll talk about those meeting dates from you on your side first too.
And I apologize for being late tonight. I think it's 6, I was in that position that should have ended the hour before it did, but as I think the case,
Sure.
Always the other side.
You know, we were having to get the court on the phone to deal with issues, and so we just.
But it worked out very well with you on the phone like that.
Well, I appreciate everybody coming out and sharing. Look forward to seeing everybody at our next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thomas, I would like you to